Hello, welcome to Inspiring Women with ADHD. I'm Renee Allen, the host of this podcast. I'm just wiggling in my chair. Imagine that, someone with ADHD wiggling in their chair, huh? Perhaps you don't have the wiggly aspect of ADHD, the hyperactive component, but if you do, you may be able to relate to not being able to sit still. And I've listened to podcasters before who say they record in their closets. And I always wondered why. I thought, do you live in an apartment? Do you have roommates and you need to have your own space? But what I've learned is they need a space that has a lot of fabric, padding, not flat spaces like a wall, window, that kind of thing, so that the sound doesn't echo. And I'm not in a closet. I'm in a bedroom, but I'm also on a desk, and the desk has flat spaces. So any movement I make, and this is one of those secretary desks where that kind of folds out. So if I bump the part that folds out, it'll make a little sound. That I put a baby blanket on top of the desk, so it's not a hard surface. It was my son's blanket, my 21-year-old son's. He's my youngest. It has turtles on it and little frogs and little dragonflies, but it's on here so that no cables or cords can make noise. But I'm doing my best. I felt that it was making noises when I was wiggling, but I think I'm doing okay now. But welcome to Inspiring Women with ADHD. I know I already said that, but here I'm saying it again. So today I want to talk to you about relationships, not friendships, but male-female relationships for women who have ADHD. And I'm going to talk about it from a husband perspective instead of a boyfriend or partner perspective. But if you want to relate it to you in any way that works, if you don't have a husband and you have a relationship, and maybe see if it can pertain to you. It's just a lot easier than saying, or this, or this, or this, in my brain to keep it straight. I'm just going to say husband. And I've been married a long time, so that's what I'm going off of. I've been married a lot longer than I ever dated anyone. I didn't have very many boyfriends. I had a few, but no long-term relationships or anything that was serious. High school, didn't really count. None of that was serious. But my husband and I didn't date very long before we got married, and we've been married over 35 years, 36 years and counting. So I want to talk about this because I've seen this come up in different social media communities or even just social media videos. Somebody may talk on a TikTok or Instagram reel or something about their relationship with their husband or their boyfriend. And often what happens is the woman doesn't feel a deep connection with her husband, doesn't feel like he understands what she needs in form of communication. And obviously this is something that happens in a lot of relationships, a lot of male-female relationships. But for women with ADHD, especially if you have the component where you feel like you need to share, you need to connect, you need these deep, deep relationships, and you connect deeply with people. I know there are some women with ADHD who don't have the social component. They don't love to be social. They don't like to talk a lot. They're more introverted. Although I've learned in my own family, when you have 6 kids, you learn a lot about people because none of them are the same. Well, actually 2 of them are exactly the same, but you find that not everyone's like you. And so you learn from them. And so my older son, who's a lot like me, I thought because he's really good at talking to people and communicating with people, and he enjoys being around people, I thought he was an extrovert. And he's not. That really surprised me. He'd rather go to an event and experience the event and maybe talk to 1 or 2 people, or maybe just share it with the people he walked in with or go by himself. Whereas for me, the more the merrier. The more people I can interact with, the more people I can make friends with, the better. I almost feel like I almost feel a void when I don't connect with people. I can go to the grocery store and walk in and walk out. But if I get to talk to somebody and make a little connection, all the better. I feel better because that's where I get my energy. I'm the extrovert. I get the energy from being with people. And so I'm not going to really talk about that part, although I did just talk about that part, the introvert and extrovert aspect. That's more about where you get your energy, where you recharge. And it doesn't mean that extroverts don't need downtime. We do. We need downtime too, but too much downtime, we start to fill a void. We start to miss people. We need people in our lives big time. And when you get into a relationship, when you get married, and you are used to having that need filled, that need of deep connection, of being able to talk to somebody, and you say something to them and they not only hear you, but they're really interested in what you're talking about. And you go back and forth and you laugh and you say all these things. And you may do that with your husband, but do you do it in the same way that you did with your best friend in high school or your roommate in college or your coworker that you always went to lunch with? I've always found connections, deep connections with people. And when I move and I'm not finding that, then I'm really puzzled by it. I'm searching for that. Where's my person? Where's my person that I can bond with, that best friend type of person? But back to, you have the women in your lives. Let's just say they're women. I do have some male friends too that I could talk to for hours, for sure. But whoever your girlfriend is, your best friend, male or female, that you've been able to connect with on this deep, deep level, and that person isn't your husband or your life partner, your boyfriend, long-term boyfriend, that you're in this relationship with, that you want to share your life with that person, or you hope to share your life with that person. And so many other things are great about your relationship, but you don't have that connection. And I think that when we watch movies, TV shows, we think that when you find your person, that they're going to meet all those requirements. And often, especially between male and females, we communicate differently for the most part. I'm talking about the 99% here. And you could get into that relationship and feel a little bit empty. And you might feel like, how come I can't connect with this person? And maybe therapy would help. Or maybe if I talk to other people, how does it work for them? Because it's really easy to look at everyone else and think they must have that. And it's super interesting because I've known men that are super outgoing. And when you go to church, they're standing in the hallway just waiting for somebody to walk by. And when you walk by and you meet eyes with them, you could talk to them for a half hour at least. Super, super social. I was shocked to find out that my husband said that this particular man that we knew, where we just moved away from, his wife said that when he gets home, he's really quiet, that he doesn't have that social need at home. That's his extrovert social need, not his homebody need. So that's not a part of their relationship, which is so fascinating. And, maybe my husband could say that about me, although I do talk a lot to him, but I do interact with different people. These 10 friends that I can count on my fingers, just looking right now, I communicate with them in a completely different way. And is that okay? Or is that leaving you frustrated? It may depend on where you are in your relationship or what you've learned about how people's brains are wired. And what's interesting, obviously, if I've been married 36 years, it's been a long time since I was in the young adult dating world. I got married when I was 23. Oh, did I just tell you how old I am? I did. Anyway, it's been a long time. So maybe things have changed. But even 10 years ago, I saw with my daughters who are getting married that when you're dating, there's this excitement phase, there's this honeymoon phase, even before you have a marriage and a honeymoon, of being in this relationship. And as all things do, all things grow, mature, we hope, right? And as they do, the level of attention to each other changes. And so maybe you initially thought with this person that they were going to always be there and talk to you. And then real life, you get married and you're going to work, he's going to work, or someone's going to school or whatever. And it's changing, or you need that downtime. Home is your downtime place. Things can change. But often, even in the dating phase, there's a difference in the way that you communicate. Maybe there are people who are completely content. I don't know. But from what I've seen with women with ADHD is a lot of them feel a void, an emptiness, feel alone when they don't have that connection with their husband. And sometimes they question, is this even the right relationship? And I had to learn early on, and I don't know how early on, that my marriage relationship wasn't going to be my source for that kind of connection. It might be for somebody, but for me, it wasn't. I learned very quickly that my husband's brain is wired a lot differently than mine. He doesn't have any ADHD symptoms, any ways that I am. He can sit still. His brain can be still. He can think deeply. I can think deeply too, but it's going 100 miles an hour. He can speak slowly. And it's been interesting because as I started teaching yoga, and I've even noticed on the podcast, I do speak slowly sometimes. I think yoga's taught me to do that. But in real life conversations, it's almost like I'm in a race because I have so many things I want to share. And I don't know if you've ever done this, but sometimes I'm talking to somebody and I'm so excited that I almost hyperventilate because the ideas are coming faster. The stories are coming faster than I can even say them. My excitement's building with it. My hands are going around in circles right now as I talk to you because the hyperactive component, my body has to move while I talk. And I find that I almost trip on my words. Like I almost go so fast that I'm going to trip and just leap forward. It feels like that. And I feel almost like I can't breathe fast enough to keep up with it. Have you ever felt that way? It's kind of like, slow down, slow down, slow down. And I don't know if I'm truly hyperventilating, but that's the only way I can compare it. And I think that my husband has never experienced that. He talks to people and he pauses and he is completely comfortable with the pauses where I get uncomfortable with the pause. If I'm talking to someone in real life that's talking slowly and they're doing some pause like that, while they're thinking about what they're going to say, I start to feel really awkward inside. I start to feel discomfort because if I were doing that, that means that in my mind, it's still going, but I'm not sure what to do. And I'm kind of panicking almost. It's kind of like when you're younger and there's this really cute boy that you like, and you go up to him and all of a sudden you can't speak very clearly. It's more of that kind of thing. It's not talking because you're nervous or something. And maybe that is why that person's not talking very quickly. But when they do that, I start to feel that way because that's how I would feel if I talk that way. And my husband's told me different experiences. I've watched him, have conversations with people too. But he's told me times when he's been interacting with somebody trying to accomplish something, like at a doctor's office and trying to get in to see the doctor, and the receptionist won't like him. She probably doesn't like him. She won't let him. This is a real story, and it probably doesn't make sense because I'm not giving you real context. But we are friends with this doctor. The doctor told him, come by even if you don't have an appointment, and I'll let you do this, ABC. And so he came in. The receptionist wouldn't let him see the doctor. She wouldn't even go try. And she probably knew that's what the rules were, so she didn't want to disturb the doctor. But my husband kept trying to explain to her that it was okay, and she kept being that door that said no. She wouldn't let him pass the door. And I was fascinated by the story because he said he just stood there and he just looked at her and paused and paused and paused. And even when I paused a little bit ago and didn't say anything, that was uncomfortable. So I had to say paused and paused and paused this time. But then he just looked at her and said, could you please just get a message to him that I'm in the office and I'll wait? And she finally went, Yes, I'll do that. And then the doctor came out and did what he needed him to do. He needed some form signed to get some lab work done, which is another long story. But I was kind of fascinated by it because I thought I couldn't look at somebody and just pause like that. I can be around friends or family and not talk. When you're really close and comfortable with somebody, when you can spend a lot of time, even without a TV show on, even without the radio, you're in the car, you can spend a lot of time without talking. There's that comfortable time, being in the kitchen, cooking, doing whatever you're doing, going on a walk. You don't have to talk all the time, although some of us enjoy it. But it wasn't that. He was fine with not talking because that's his usual mode. And it's not like he never talks. Sometimes he talks a lot. But that connection that I have with my very, very best girlfriends is much different than what I have with him. And early in my marriage, I really mourned for that. I lived near some old roommates to begin with when we first got married. I even had a really great friend. My first full-time job, I met this friend named Sarah Jane. She's still out there. She's actually an author and she's owned multiple businesses. She did a lot more business-wise in life than I did. She was younger too. She just had her vision and she did it, and I'm so proud of her. But we hit it off in that department of 100 people. We hit it off, and she'd come over to our basement that my husband and I lived in. She would spend the night with me if my husband was out of town, which didn't happen very often. I was so newly married that I was really sad when he was gone. So inviting old roommates or friends over was how I filled that void. Clearly, I need to fill those voids. But I've had those friends, those connections, and laugh and talk and talk and laugh. And when I moved away from that college town and had all these new experiences in a huge city, we moved to LA. I'd never lived in a huge city. I'd only seen what they were like on TV or in movies. We lived in a really small town of about 3,500 people. And I drove through San Francisco to go to Giants baseball games. I drove to San Jose to see my aunt. I drove to or past LA to go to Disneyland. But I didn't really ever live in a city. So anyway, I'm in this big city. I don't know anybody. I start a full-time job there, make a best friend at work, make a best friend from my husband's school that was the wife of one of the men in his classes, and, kept meeting friends like that, a best friend at church, and I keep collecting these best friends. But at the beginning, I didn't have those best friends. And so I get there to this apartment with my husband. I start meeting people, but it takes a while to have some connections. And I remember just feeling so lonely at the end of the day. Like, I wish I could just talk to him like I talk to my friends. And actually, my first best friend there was a teenager. I taught a class of teenage girls at church, and she and I connected big time. We were so much alike. And we still send each other Christmas cards and stuff. And I was probably, like 8 years older than her, but I felt so much older. But she became my first friend, and she even came and spent the night if my husband went out of town. I craved those friendships. I craved getting to communicate. And it wasn't just satisfied by having these friends. I kept thinking, why isn't this happening in my marriage? Why can't this happen in our relationship? That's the perfect thing, right? That's what other people have. That's what everyone has. I didn't have internet to tell me anything about relationships. There were no blogs, there was no YouTube, there was no social media. There wasn't anybody talking that way. The only way I could learn about relationships was from watching Oprah or talk shows. And I did. Watching talk shows, I did. When I stopped working full time, when I had my first daughter, I became an apartment manager so we could get close to free rent. It wasn't completely free. We lived in Pasadena, really close to where the Rose Parade is, like a block away. And I watched talk shows all morning long because that was like talking to somebody. That was the older version of now people listen to podcasts or listen to audiobooks when they need to get things done. Back then, we either listened to a talk show to hear other people talk about either their problems or just learn about them. You know, it was kind of reality TV before there was reality TV, or talking on the phone to somebody. And that required a real phone, a landline, but we did have wireless phone. That was actually when I had my first wireless phone. I remember buying one. We might have had one at the other apartment. Not that you need to think this through with me. If we did, it was the kind where you pulled out that wire like you see on Seinfeld. It could poke you in the eye. The one that we bought when we were in our apartment in Pasadena was by Sony, and it was so cool looking. It kind of looked like the early car phones, but they didn't call them cell phones. But it had rubber at the top, and it cost over $100. That was a big time purchase for us. But my husband was a product designer. He still is. And he loved the design of that. And it was cool because it didn't have the big wire that came out the top, the antenna, I guess is what it is. But anyway, back to communicating. I do remember a lot of nights just feeling lonely at night and feeling sad about it. And we lived down in LA for 5 years. We lived in our next spot for 3 years. It was all the way until I'm in my other house. So it's probably 10 plus years into our marriage. I have memories by which bed I was in, which bedroom I was in. And I remember mostly that lonely time at night because that's when I would talk to my roommates. That's when I would sit and talk. I guess when I was growing up, I didn't do that. I was the only girl. And so I read books and listened to records. But I had enough friends. Maybe I got all my talking out during the day. And my mom and dad like to talk a lot too. You know, they can sit and talk to you forever. So maybe I got that at home. Maybe I thought every husband did that because my mom and dad would talk a lot too. Maybe so. Who knows? And any of you who are more in my age group of having had their children, now they're adults, now we may be even having grandchildren, I do, but I know not everyone my age does. You may be thinking, yeah, I totally remember, the first wireless phones when we called them car phones and things. But any of you who are younger, hopefully this is a fun little history lesson for you. Or maybe you already know it. Maybe your mom likes to tell you these kinds of things too. It is kind of fun to go through memory lane and think about it because it's just so different now. But I didn't have the kind of information that's available now. Obviously, I never would have known I had ADHD as an adult if there wasn't the internet. I don't know, maybe Oprah would have talked about it someday, but, she stopped doing her talk shows. But back to feeling the emptiness. So here I am at least 10 years into my marriage. And I just want you to know, maybe you'll figure this out earlier in your relationship than I did. And meanwhile, I do have a lot of best friends, right? I have a lot of people, but I still feel this void because this is an important relationship to me. And I wasn't expecting my husband to change, but I wasn't feeling that closeness because I felt so alone in that way, in that social connection way. I didn't feel alone in other ways. And we had a good relationship. We still do. We've had a really peaceful relationship, which I know isn't common for a lot of people. But I remember going to a camp out once with a lot of teenage girls and a lot of adult women. So for a whole week, I'm camping and I'm having girl time, singing, laughing, being silly, deep talking, maybe even some crying, helping somebody through a problem, all these things that I love to do. So I come back from this camp out, and as soon as I get home, my husband tells me, and we have 4 children at the time, and my husband tells me that we'd been invited to this barbecue from one of his coworkers, and I knew him and his wife. And he said, there's a barbecue, if you can get changed and we'll go, and we'll bring the kids and it'll be really nice and, out in the redwoods and stuff. So I thought, okay. And it was about a 10, 15-minute drive over a mountain and down a little valley, which actually passed a house that we lived in later for 10 years, a really wonderful home in the redwoods. But we get to this house and it hits me that I feel alone because we didn't talk in the car. The kids were talking, I'm sure, and there may have been some small talk, that kind of thing. But between my husband and I, there was a huge change from what I had just been doing for a whole week with women, with girls. And it just hit me like somebody had taken this emptiness and kind of scooped it out more and made it emptier. And I just thought, gosh, I just feel so alone. I feel so alone. I don't know how else to explain it, but feeling alone. And if you felt this way, maybe you have another word for it, whether it's a void, it's just a lack of something, and it doesn't feel good. And it's not to fault anybody else. That's what I learned. But I still felt that way. And I get to this barbecue and we get some food. I don't know if I ate first or anything, but inside emotionally, I just did not feel good. And so I excused myself. The kids were fine. And I went for a walk and I cried. And I just cried. And I just remember thinking, I feel so lonely. I feel so lonely. And I've never told my husband this, actually. Hopefully he never listens to my podcast. I doubt he will. But I just felt very, very lonely. And I don't know how much longer it was from then that I realized that's not who he is, and that's okay. And there was a period of time where at night I would actually pretend in my mind what he was saying back to me. Because a lot of times at night, it still happens, but not as often. But it still happens. It just depends on the day, I guess. But we'll get in bed and I'll report on a whole bunch of things or comment on a whole bunch of things that he didn't know about that day or about just what was in my head or is in my head at the time. And it will go from topic to topic. They could be like different topics in a row. And I could pause for a break, but I know he doesn't have anything to say. And then I'll just say another thing. And it's just a pattern we've gotten into. I don't know if anybody else has ever done this, but I laugh because, you feel kind of crazy if you think you say you've done something and other people are like, that's weird. But I keep finding with ADHD, when people share things, I thought I was the only one who did that. I thought I was the only one who did that. It becomes very common to have patterns in your relationship, especially if you're different. And we're always going to be different in something, whether it's hobbies or the way our brains work or what we're interested in or what we're gifted with or what our challenges are. It could go on and on and on and on. And if you're married or in your relationship for a really long time, you will fall into a pattern. And that became our pattern, that I would talk and talk and talk, and he wouldn't say very much. And for a while, I didn't really enjoy that, but I still needed to do the talking. And so sometimes I would just say at the end of the conversation, I guess my one-sided conversation, or partway through, if I really wanted to know, I would say, what do you think about that? And usually there would be a pause, like at that doctor's office. Not that he was trying to persuade me like he was the receptionist, but he would kind of pause and he'd have to think about it. And I think, wow, when somebody else is talking to me, hardly ever do I need to stop and think about something if they ask me a question, because I have so many responses in my mind just going and going, going. Even in a classroom, when a teacher's teaching, unless I'm completely baffled, usually I have all these conversations in my mind that I would love to have with that teacher in response, but you can't do that. Hopefully, some point I learned you can't do that all the time. You have to limit it. You have to pace yourself, and you may not even get to respond. You may just have to keep that in your own little mind. But with my husband, usually he has to pause a little bit. And maybe he's deciding between a few responses, or maybe he's giving it some thought. Maybe he didn't know I need to ask him that. There have been some times that he would go to events that I wouldn't go to. And when he'd get back, I'd say, so how was it? What happened there? And that would be a pattern too, because I was curious. And many years into it, he said something like, I realized that you were going to ask me that when I came home. So I thought about it, like he crafted an answer on the way home because he knew I was going to ask. He didn't just have one ready at his fingertips, at his brain fingertips. So that was one thing that kind of helped me, was just asking questions and being okay with the pauses and being okay if it wasn't a chatty answer. So that may be something that can help you if you're feeling like things are one-sided. Just being able to pause and ask. And I know not everybody wants to ask. One of my really good friends, when we lived in Pasadena, didn't like to ask her husband to do things that she thought he should think of on his own. And when they had their first baby, which was their only baby they had together, and they had their baby girl, she would get so upset with her husband when their baby needed a diaper change or something like that, and he wasn't responding to it. And she'd openly get mad at him, and which was, a little awkward for us, but that was their relationship. And one time we were on a trip together, and she was complaining to me about it, and I told her, he may not notice your baby's needs as soon as you do. Maybe he does, and he's ignoring it, and you could talk to him about that. But it's possible that he hasn't even noticed it. So maybe asking him, hey, did you notice, or maybe you didn't notice that her diaper's wet. Can you change her diaper? And knowing him, he would say yes. Maybe some husbands wouldn't. A lot of husbands notice before their wives. But in this relationship, he didn't. And she gets so upset with him when he didn't do what she wanted him to do. And that taught me that sometimes you just ask him. So asking my husband to participate in the conversation was helpful for me. And maybe that'll be helpful for you. Another thing that was helpful, and my husband thought it was silly, I may have mentioned this before on the podcast, but I remember sometimes at night when I would talk or ask and he wasn't saying a lot. And I said, sometimes when you don't say anything, I just have started making up your answers in my own mind and pretending what you're saying back to me, like it's a little TV show or movie or something. And it was entertaining me. And it was helping me laugh and smile inside, or maybe even feel extra cherished and loved. And he said, you can't do that. Like, that's not reality. And I thought, it's my reality. I can do it if I want. If you're not going to fill that time with an answer, I'll fill it. And, we kind of laughed about it. But I actually did do that for a while. And eventually, I think I started learning that we're all different and that's okay. And that it's not to fault him to think that he knows how important it is to have that kind of connection, that he can think of things to say as much as I do, or that he will have the responses that I need him to have. It's kind of crazy to think of, huh? In fact, today I was talking to him about going to the doctor yesterday, and instead of seeing the doctor, I saw the PA, the physician's assistant, and I really like her. It's the second time I've seen her. But what she said to me in the 2 times that I've been to her, I don't actually really agree with her professional judgment. And I think if the doctor was in, he would be saying something different without divulging my medical information. That's all I'll say. But so I leave a little perplexed because I really like her, but I don't think you really know. And obviously, it could sound like I'm clueless, but I really do feel that way. And so I said to my husband, it's too bad she's not just saying what I wish she would say. And then I kind of laughed because, obviously we can't have everyone say what we wish they would say. Wouldn't life be easy if they did? But learning that we are all different and that we may not be able to get the kind of validation or connection that we need in every single way from our husband, our boyfriend, our partner, whoever we have in our life that we want to be the closest with. You may not be able to be close in every way with that person. And that's okay. And that's what makes it really great with these friends that we have, is that they feel a need. And I know that I don't feel those same needs for my husband as his friends do. I am not interested in everything that he is. And I think being a people pleaser, and that can also be a part of it, of wanting to not disappoint people, wanting to make them happy, wanting to have that connection be as lovely and peaceful as possible. I used to try to be interested in all of his things. And I'm not saying that I was losing my own personality to fake being interested, because I really wasn't interested in everything that he's interested in. He loves taking cars apart and fixing engines and things like that. and my brain can't really process how to change a tire. My dad tried to show me over and over and over, and I got straight A's, but I couldn't change a tire. I probably could if I really, really wanted to, and it became my drive and I needed to do it to be able to get home. In fact, I think I did change a tire once, actually, but I think somebody stopped and helped me. And some of that came back, but really, I'm not interested in it. Like I said, it has to be a desperate situation. But I felt bad when I wasn't showing interest. Does that make sense? So it wasn't like I was always interested, because you can't fake some things. You can't always go around and do what people want you to do. But I felt bad when I didn't, because I felt like, I guess that was my immature part of the relationship. I felt like I needed to be there for everything and he needed to be there for everything. And I eventually only let go of that because I thought, he's not interested in everything that you are. Stop feeling guilty about it. That was more of almost a revenge play in a way, like, don't feel bad because he doesn't do this for you. But it really was kind of more of a balancing thing. And I know this is making it sound like I'm having a hard time with this. I'm not. I mean, maybe I have, but not today and not for years. Thankfully. I don't know if any of this is helpful to you. I hope it is, even if you just find some common ground and think, I'm not the only one. That may be it. But also just understanding, if you didn't before, that we may have to find other ways to get that connection. We may need to find other ways to have someone share a hobby, and that's okay. And you will find other couples who do what you wish was happening or what you had once wished would happen. Like, I super love fitness. I love yoga. But before I loved yoga, I loved fitness. I loved working out and stuff. My husband's never had an interest in any of that. He's more like my dad, where he would rather build a fence to get exercise than walk in the door of a gym and take a class or use equipment to get stronger or to work as hard, or, that kind of thing. He'd rather go on a hike. He'd rather do things that weren't gym related, I guess is the only way to say it, or gym class related. And yoga, he tried it with me before and didn't like it at all. And he realizes it means he needs it, but, I'm not going to try to convince everyone to do yoga. So if he comes knocking at my door for that, I'll help him. I mostly want you to know that if you're feeling any of this need for validation, need for connection in your relationship, and you don't have that, find it where you can find it, in a healthy way, of course, in a way that's not interruptive to your marriage relationship, in friends, in even just getting in touch with people. They could be relatives, and find that connection in a way that you need, with people who are welcoming it or able to reciprocate in a way that's helpful. And they may not always do it either. I have been such a communicator my whole life. I realized I started writing letters probably in maybe third grade, I think. I started writing real letters. I stopped writing real letters maybe 5-10 years ago. I used to write letters every single night of our marriage for years and years, before internet, before email. And I had a lap desk. I don't know if you remember those. They used to sell them at Hallmark stores, and they were like a pillow at the bottom, but they were kind of more beanbaggy chair, like, where they're heavy. And then there was a little desk, and you could sit at your couch or bed or something and write letters. And they even had them where you could take the top and lift it up and store stationery inside. So I would write to a different friend or relative every night. And even when I was in college, if someone moved away from college, or I moved away to go to college, I would write to my high school friends, or I would write to my roommates who went home for a semester. I just had such a need. And it is extreme to a lot of people, but it's real to me. And that's what I did to connect. And not everybody wrote back. And I didn't get offended by that. I realized, I guess, at that time, that not everybody likes to write letters, or not everybody knows what to say or feels comfortable doing that. But that was my need that was met that way. Now I find it other ways. And I'm sure if you're the same way, you found other ways too. You're already finding them, because we live in this time of technology where you can send videos, audios, written messages. And you've probably seen that some people respond more easily than others. Some of us are connectors, some aren't. And it's hard when you're really close to somebody in real life and they're not a long distance communicator. I have a few of those friends, and some of them I try to still see, because when we can see each other, then that's when we can communicate. And there's others that I haven't seen in maybe 10 or 15 years. And it's sad for me anyway to have that friendship kind of dissolve. It's just far away. If we saw each other, I'm sure we could communicate again, but you can't always stay in touch with everyone. And that's okay. One of the small tragedies in my life anyway, but I've had to learn that that's okay. And doing all those things, Marco Poloing, phone calls, texting, sending pictures, those help me feel validated, connected, and I don't feel as deep of a need to meet that in my marriage, because I'm able to feel that in real life or in digital life. So, and I'm sure this podcast is part of that too, the need to connect. Speaking of which, if you ever want to get in touch with me, that's my dream, to be connected with more women with ADHD. And if you're a communicator and want to get in touch with me, I'm trying to make it easier on my website. But you know how easy it is to hyper-focus and go down a rabbit hole and then become a perfectionist and then have new ideas. Oh, yeah. The last 3 or 4 days, I've been completely revamping my website. And it started with, I need to make it easier for people to contact me, because contact forms just kind of seem like, is that going out into the world of nothing? So I kind of changed that. So I don't have a contact page. It's on my about page. And there's actually a button that you can just DM me through Instagram. And if you do use the contact button and fill out that form, it will go to my email and I can email you back. But I'd love to be in touch, because I'd love to find out, just as I said, I've found on social media posts and things, what people are struggling with. I'd love to find out what you struggle with, what you relate to that I talk about. I have both the hyperactive component and what's the other focus? The inattentive, lack of focus. I can't pay attention enough to my own brain to know what that's called for a moment. But yeah, I have combined ADHD. And yeah, it's a struggle and it's a joy too. It can be entertaining, but it's also a struggle and it gets in the way of things. And so that's why I'm doing this, to share anything that has helped me get ideas from you, and hopefully we can inspire each other. Thank you so much for being here. If you want to find me on my website, there's probably a link wherever you're listening to the podcast. But if you don't see it, it's reneeallen.com, but it has a dash in between Renee and Allen, the hyphen little slash thing. It's not a slash, it's a dash. There's got to be an easier way to say that. But thank you so much for being here. Bye.
Open windows, broken shadows. Frozen dreams are left for tomorrow. Without a cause. No time for a pause. The silence of sound has yet been found, but not by me.